Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here and grateful for the invitation. It's in fact my second time at BRIC, I think. Just before I begin, could I draw your attention to something that is very close to my heart? BRIC generously offered me an honorarium for doing this, but I said, no, I'd much sooner that you made a donation to a cause that interests me, and it's called the Friends of the SOCO Fund. This is to try and give women a university education in the poorest, or just about the poorest country in the world. So let me just say, even more kindly, people printed off some leaflets for me. So if you're interested, there's a website, go there. So that's my advert over. Let me. But anyway, thank you to BRIC for your for the donation. I teach philosophy at Princeton Theological Seminary, but for a long time before I went to the seminary, I taught in secular universities. And in going to the seminary, which I've been 11 years there now, going to the seminary, the task was to teach philosophy in a context that was primarily a divinity school. We get other students as well, but primarily a divinity school, without at the same time moving straight into theology in the arts, which is a voguish sort of thing. So how was it to be the case that you could teach philosophy to students in divinity, but in a way that was especially relevant to them, especially since in our circumstances, students can take regular philosophy courses at Princeton University. So that was the challenge I faced, and that's the challenge I've been working on over the last decade or so. And one way of doing that is to see where things that have interested philosophers in the academic world of philosophy bear on the things that really concern divinity students and those who are going to be in the pastorate and other forms of ministry. So one of those things, and this here I come to very familiar ground, one of those things, and as a matter of fact, this is why the position, the original position of teaching philosophy at Princeton Seminary was created way back in the 1880s. One of the things is the issue of the veracity of the Bible. Now, it doesn't take much to know that in this country there's quite a deep division and some cultural division, and some of that division turns still on this issue as to what we should think and how we should regard the Scriptures. And people divide at their most extreme between those who want to say that the Scriptures, and particularly the stories in Genesis, are literally true, and those who want to say that they are not. And I think what's at issue here in the background, I could say a little bit more about this, but not directly, is the authority of Scripture. So here's an issue then. It's still with us, surprisingly. Indeed, actually, it's come around again, having had its first great outing in the 19th century. It's come around again and is in some ways as hot a topic as ever. I was told recently, I don't know if it's true, that one of the people in the frame for a cabinet appointment under the new presidency is someone who believes in creationism. And creationism, I don't know if that's true or not, but in any case, there certainly are people for whom this is a big, big issue. Now, is there anything that philosophy can say about this at an oblique but interesting angle? And that's what I want to talk about a little bit. So let me leave the Bible aside for a minute or two and talk about the philosophy of literature. The philosophy of literature is a branch of the philosophy of the arts, and it seeks to explore distinctive problems and issues and questions about literature, broadly speaking literature meaning imaginative literature, and how that relates to other ways in which we approach and think about the world. Now, one of the things about literature that is immediately striking is this: it isn't all of a kind. We all read books for pure entertainment. And at least fewer and fewer people are reading books. But actually that's turning around again now. But there are books that people read. You find them in the airport stands for pure entertainment. But not all books, we think, are just pure entertainment. Some are what we call serious literature, and serious literature can be heavy, but it doesn't have to be. Some of the greatest writers of all time have written really serious literature, and yet the kind of literature that grips us and drives us through, it has all the features of entertaining literature, a good storyline, good imagery, beautiful language, commanding descriptions and so on. But nonetheless, there is this distinction between, I'll just use this distinction between the serious and the light. There's nothing wrong with the light, but the interesting philosophical question is, what's the difference? Where exactly does the difference lie between serious literature and light literature? Just in passing, let me say, one of the great, actually he was English, but one of the great detective story writers, Raymond Chandler, if any of you remember Raymond Chandler. But one of the prefaces to one of The Big Sleep, I think, to one of his novels, he raises this question, addresses it: can detective literature be great literature? Or is it just entertainment? And that's an interesting question, and the philosophical issue is, what would it take to cross the line from entertainment to serious literature and remain a detective story? I could talk about that at length, but I'm not going to. The issue then for philosophers is, what marks out serious literature? What makes it more than simply entertainment? And the obvious answer to that cannot be that it's factual. Because serious, great literature, as much as entertaining literature, is an act of the imagination. So where then does the difference lie between the serious and the light, if it cannot be the difference between the factual and the fictional? And that immediately raises this interesting thought. Maybe the distinction between fact and fiction is not where we should be looking. Maybe the distinction between fact and fiction is not actually the interesting one at all. And that's true even if you think about entertaining stuff. A lot of people like to read scurrilous stories. They get, there are even more of them on the internet and social media now. The question of truth doesn't always arise with respect to them, but they purport to be factual. People read them purely for entertainment. So the distinction between fact and fiction is not really a distinction that one wants to spend a lot of time on when you are more interested in the difference between the serious and the light, the significant and the entertaining. So what is that difference? How might we articulate that difference? And we can, of course, reach for certain expressions. We can say, well, significant literature, serious literature, say War and Peace or some great novel like that, has something to tell us, something to teach us. But what does it have to tell us? What does it have to teach us if, as we all agree, just stick with the case of War and Peace, it's Tolstoy's imagination? How is it possible, this is the philosophical question, for imaginative literature to have something to tell us or to teach? Sometimes people are dismissive. They say, so you mean to tell me it was all made up? That notion of it's being all made up suggests that if it's been made up, you can forget it for certain purposes. But actually, the fact that it was made up, if you bear in mind this distinction between serious and light literature, that fact is not going to be consequential. No, our interest should be somewhere else. I'm coming round to some biblical examples soon to show how this might be the case. But the question is, what is it that makes literature serious as opposed to simply entertaining? And as I say, we have these phrases. It is something to tell us. It is something to teach us. But how, since it's all made up? Well, the answer is this very large topic, as you can imagine. I mean, you can read and write many books about this. But the answer, I shall suggest, lies in the idea of imagination. When we talk about imagination, we need to draw another distinction. Not everything that is imaginative is fanciful. That's an important distinction. When we encourage children to use their imagination, we're often encouraging them just to let their minds roll, to fancifully think up anything. And when my children were smaller than they are, I would just make up stories, and they might be slightly ridiculous, but they would all be fanciful, kind of fairy tale kind of things. That requires imagination. But other things require imagination too. So imagine somebody tells you a story about someone they know, or someone that they've encountered, or an event that has happened, and you're instantly inclined to bracket it or put it into a particular box, or just identify it as something that happened to you. I might say, no, wait, use your imagination. Try to think imaginatively about this. And when I say try to think imaginatively about it, then something important has come into the picture. Understanding. You are not going to understand this person, this episode, this event, this thing that happened, unless you use your imagination. But how could using imagination increase or enhance your understanding? And that question, which is a philosophical question, still keeps arising. We know it's true that it has to be imaginatively approached in order to understand. And we know that imagination is something that we involve and employ when we go in for fantasy and fancy. But it's also something that is absolutely crucial to understanding, and in particular, perhaps even exclusively, to understanding other people. Now, I will now return to the question of Bible. And let me just go back fleetingly to this great division and debate between the Bible and science. Now, this clash between Bible and science has its cold warriors on both sides. There are plenty of scientists, some of them very famous, who have sold literally millions of books, whose greatest pleasure is to put the boot into religious faith and belief, and if possible, the Bible. But actually, it doesn't take much reading of these to see that they are far, far away from the things that actually matter. Conversely, those who insist that the value of the Bible lies in its providing us with an alternative scientific theory generally reveal themselves as being completely ignorant on the scientific side. So maybe we should entertain this thought that somehow the issue is not about science and Bible, but actually somewhere else. And so indeed I believe it is. I think the real issue deep down is about the authority of Scripture, not about its nature. Some people believe, I take it most people in this room, believe that in the Scriptures, Old Testament, New, there are truths revealed that are uniquely revealed there and will not be revealed in other ways. And those who believe passionately in science think that there is only one way in which you can come across the truth, and that is by scientific investigation. But scientific investigation leaves to one side the kind of imaginative understanding in which art and the artists, and particularly novelists and poets, have long been engaged. Now, I think that when people speak of the Bible as literature, then there are those on the literalist side who think this is a cop-out, that somehow this is a way of saying, well, it doesn't really matter whether it's true or not. But that cop-out, I want to say, is a misunderstanding, again, on both sides. Because the Bible is not a book, it's a collection of books. And if you ask yourself the question, is it literally true? Which bit were you thinking of? Is Psalm 23 literally true? What could that mean if you think about the Psalms? Or take the book of Job. Is that literally true? What could that mean? But now I want to focus on two Bible stories, episodes. I don't want to talk too long because I want to give lots of opportunity for discussion. I want to pick on two stories, one from the New Testament, one from the Old. One is probably the most familiar Bible story, one of the most familiar stories in the world, the story of the Good Samaritan. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho. You know the story, I needn't repeat it. And tell me this, is it true or not? Now notice about this story that actually it could be. Jesus could have been saying, there weren't newspapers then, but imagine, Jesus could have been saying, did you read that story in the newspaper the other day? It could be true. It could be a fact. Or Jesus could have said, when someone said, as he did, who is my neighbor then, in this challenging way? Jesus could have said, I'm going to tell you a story. And the important point I want to stress is this: it doesn't matter whether Jesus was using a report of something with which his audience was familiar or he was telling them a story. Because the way in which the story bears the truth that it carries is indifferent to the, if I use a horrible word, the facticity of the story of the Good Samaritan. It doesn't matter. Now consider another Bible story in which it's utterly obvious that the story and its meaning and significance are not intended to be factual, but nonetheless intended to be true. And that is the story when the prophet Nathan encounters David. You will remember that David, from a rooftop, spies Bathsheba. She is very beautiful, and he is immediately filled with desire for her. But it turns out that she is married to Uriah the Hittite. So how is he to marry someone already married, whom he desires so deeply? And he comes up with a scheme. And the scheme is to arrange for his commander-in-chief to send Uriah the Hittite to the very front line of the battle, so the chances are high that he will be killed. And so indeed he is. And this leaves David free to marry Bathsheba, whom he desires. The prophet comes, and he tells the king, I have a story I want to tell you. It's a story about something that happened not far away, about a poor farmer who has just the one lamb, which he had nurtured and kept. And the rich farmer next to him has guests come. Do you know what? He is so mean-spirited, he will not provide a lamb of his own. So what does he do? He goes, he takes the lamb from the poor farmer, and he has that one killed and dressed and presented to his guests. David flies into a rage. Show me this person. Justice must be done. And the prophet points and says, you are the man. You are the man. Now think about that episode, very powerful episode, when David says, you are the man. He has told the king a truth. He has, in the expression we use, he has spoken truth unto power. But he has spoken truth unto power by means of a story. And it would be completely wrong for David to say, what do you mean, you are the man? No, tell me about this other man. I want to get him. David hears and sees the truth, but the truth is conveyed through a story. Now, I take it I am stating something pretty obvious, pretty clear and plain. And so what I want to say is this concern that philosophers of literature have had for a long time to draw the right distinctions between novels and poems and plays, to pick out those, like Shakespeare's tragedies, that are enduringly significant, and leave to one side those that are merely passing fashions on Broadway or something, to sort that out over time. And if one can, this is the role of the critic, to even anticipate how time will judge a work of art, that distinction is the one that matters. And it matters because what is of importance in literature is not fact at all, but truth. And what is significant for truth is not fiction. It may be, it may not be, but rather imagination. And what is true about imagination is that it enables you and me, thanks often to the writer, to view the world around us with more imaginative eyes, you might say. And that is precisely what is happening in the case of David and the prophet Nathan. So David, you might say, it wouldn't be fanciful to say his eyes are being opened, but the opening of his eyes is not that some matter of fact that remained hidden has now been revealed. It is rather that his eyes are opened by imagination. So what, some at least, because nothing in philosophy is ever agreed, so let me just say I'm pushing a particular line here, but it's one I'm more than happy to defend. So according to this way of viewing it, the importance and of literary imagination is, and this too, of course, is a figure of speech, is to open your eyes. To open your eyes to the ways of the world and the world around you. So you might think, with this I'm going to close so we can talk about things. You might think of it this way. Sometimes people think of inquiry as a kind of microscope. It's the means, it's the method by which you look more closely, in more detail, at that which is before you. But you might think of it as a different way in which you put on something that allows you to see, say, sunglasses, for example, that allows you to see the colors of things, the shape of things, more adequately than you could have done. So one way of thinking is to see that when you open your eyes, it's by seeing more detail, more and more detail, as it goes down into the factual matter. Another way of thinking of opening your eyes is that actually it takes away a lot of the things that cloud, particularly presuppositions and prejudices. It takes away the prejudgments that you might bring when you think about either individual people or about events or about the larger aspects and dimensions of the human condition. So I leave you with this thought. We will step aside from some of the most vexed and perplexing and divisive debates about Scripture if we turn instead and ask ourselves, what have we to learn from serious literature in general? And having answered that question, we may then turn back to the Scriptures, and maybe not just the Christian Scriptures, some other Scriptures too perhaps. We will turn back and begin to see how it is we really, truly do learn from them. Anyway, with that I'll leave it so as we can talk. Thank you very much.